Right now, the attorneys for Alec Murdaugh holding a news conference. Just last week, Murdaugh's conviction of killing his wife and son thrown out, meaning he gets a new trial. Well, now his attorneys are going to speak in just a couple of seconds. We're supposed to be hearing from both Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin. We're being told they're going to be discussing more about what happens next and learn more about that lawsuit that we just heard. Take a listen.
Has announced he's considering the death penalty in this case. Clearly, he is not talking to the lawyers in his office. He's probably talking to his political consultants who thought that was a good soundbite for his governor's campaign. The law is clear that he cannot seek the death penalty if it is due to vindictive prosecution. That is, and here's the question, what does he know today he didn't know 5 years ago? Why is he saying he's going to seek the death penalty? Is there some new piece of evidence? So we're a little sick and tired, and we've seen this process since the beginning of this case, where Alan Wilson plays politics as opposed to playing prosecutor. He's got great lawyers on his staff. He should listen to them, defer to their judgment. Coincidentally, he has not looked into the attempted jury tampering of Becky Hill. We're going to talk about a civil suit in a minute, but clearly the statute says whoever tampers with a jury or attempts to tamper with a jury is guilty of a crime. Judge Toll's fact findings were clear. Becky Hill attempted. The Supreme Court last week, Becky Hill attempted. So please, Alan, focus on your job and not the politics. Now, having gotten that out of my system, let me turn this over to Jim Griffin, who's going to talk about the lawsuit that was filed this morning, and then Phil Barber and he and I will answer questions. Jim?
Yeah, good morning. Today in United States District Court, federal court, the Charleston Division, we filed a lawsuit on behalf of Richard Alexander Murdaugh Sr. versus Rebecca Hill. In this lawsuit, we file it under the federal civil rights statute, 42 United States Code 1983, to redress constitutional deprivation of rights. Those rights were Alec's right to a fair trial, a right that him be tried before an untampered, untainted jury. With the South Carolina Supreme Court's ruling, it has been adjudged as a matter of state law that she deprived Alec of his constitutional rights, deprived him of a right to a fair trial, and as a result, we've got to do it all over again, which nobody wants to do. The damages that we've alleged include the over $600,000 that was spent to try the first case and other compensatory damages. Now, let me be clear. Alec Murdaugh owes a lot of people a lot of money. None of this money that is recovered will go to him personally. And the purpose of this lawsuit is to hold Becky Hill accountable for what she did. She has not been held account at all for her conduct. And two is to investigate exactly what she did, which we'll be able to do through the course of civil litigation. We have subpoena power. We can take depositions. And so we're going to be able to understand the entire scope of her conduct. She's yet to be thoroughly investigated by the state, and she's not been held accountable by the state. And that's what we hope to do, and that's what we intend to do, and that's what we will do with this lawsuit. Thank you. Phil, what you got?
I would just amplify that and say that,
Can you hold it till the plane goes over, please?
Move this way a little bit.
Yeah.
You got to be centered.
Good. The jury process, the integrity of the jury process was violated by somebody sworn to uphold it. And that's why we're here today, and that cannot go unanswered, as Jim said. And that's what we're going to do with this lawsuit. Beyond that, we've alleged $600,000 in damages. That's a public number, by the way. There was a receivership. That money was allocated from a receivership for the defense. That was a waste because of what Becky Hill did, plus other damages alleged. And beyond that, we are going to find out exactly what happened. There will be depositions, there will be subpoenas, and she will be held to account for her actions.
Any questions? None? Okay. No?
Do you guys have any new evidence to present to your case moving forward?
Well, we have. Where'd you go, Phil?
I'm right here.
Okay. We have received a number of pieces of information post-trial. Some of them came just to us. Some of that came just to us. Some of that went to SWED, too. And we don't know what they did with it. Once the trial was over, we don't have the power to subpoena. We don't have the power to really investigate it all. All we did was, after the trial, was look into the jury misconduct. And we rode around Colleton County for a couple months through the swamp, on the dirt roads, to find these jurors and ask them questions. But once a judge is appointed, and I think we got an order on Friday that the Chief Justice has said, once the remitter is issued, which means right now the Supreme Court has the case, they got to remit it to a trial court, and he'll do that, we think, in the next couple of weeks. So at that point, then we will have subpoena power. Then we will have the ability to investigate.
With a new murder trial, how hard do you think it is going to be to find impartial jurors?
Well, let me say this to you. This has gotten extraordinary notoriety, unlike most other cases I've ever tried. But in its time, a case I prosecuted 40 years ago, Pee Wee Gaskins, Monk was there, Pee Wee Gaskins, we had to go through 400 jurors to get 14. It's important that we have what we want is individual voir dire. That means we individually question the jurors, which is not usually allowed in anything but a death penalty case. So we think we can get them. Now, can we get it in Colleton County? That's debatable, but and I think the state has the same interest, should have the same interest we have in finding 12 or 14 with alternates, impartial, fair jurors. The state should want an unsullied, uninfluenced jury as much as we do.
And have you talked to Alec recently? How does he feel about the overturn?
Jim talked to him this morning.
Yeah, we've talked to Alec a lot lately about many topics, including retrial and what that might look like. But to your specific question, frankly, when we reported back to him after our argument in the South Carolina Supreme Court, we told him it went as well as we could have hoped, and that we were very optimistic that we would get a favorable result. And he appreciated our assessment, but he was incredulous. His experience has been, since he has been on the back end of civil lawsuits and criminal indictments, that he's lost every significant legal ruling along the way, and that occurred almost daily during the trial. And when he got the order, when I spoke with him, he had already read the opinion of the Supreme Court, and he says, "I'm reading it, I see it, it says reverse, but I still have a hard time believing it. It's really just sinking in." But he was very grateful, very thankful, and he thanked all of us here that are on this side of the podium, and he got somewhat emotional. He was so, and I don't think he'll mind for me telling you this. I mean, he has always said, and he told me very early, that he deserves to be in jail, prison, for the financial crimes that he committed. But he says, being in jail for something you didn't do is a hard thing to swallow, even though I'm here doing time for what I did do. But then he said, what I was convicted of is so reprehensible, and something that is so heinous, and to be wrongfully convicted of that is almost unbearable, he says. And so he is very thankful that he is no longer a convicted murderer of his wife and son, and he's appreciative to the court for applying the rule of law, regardless of outcome. They did their job, and we're all very appreciative of that. The rule of law won out last week.
you spoken to Buster, and how does he feel about what happened last week?
So yeah, thanks for asking that question, and I want to say this. Buster Murdaugh is, hopefully we can all agree, is entitled to his privacy. That kid has been through so much, and that's all he wants is his privacy. And so we're not going to answer questions about Buster other than to say, and I say it with 100% confidence, that Buster supports his dad, Alec.
With the civil suit, are you hoping to get your hands on the SLED investigation into the jury tampering allegations by Becky Hill?
Sure. Now, we were given some information through the discovery during the motion for new trial stage. Is that all they've done? I mean, we don't know. But if that is all they've done, that really wasn't much of an investigation. And we really don't think they've done much of an investigation, but we certainly plan to.
And let me say this. There's also was a Freedom of Information Act served on SLED to get additional information. We've seen that too. Does it make sense to have the agency who has an inherent conflict, they want the conviction sustained, investigating whether it was valid or not? I mean, it just seems ridiculous. And again, I think the Attorney General's fault is not asking for some independent. He could have gotten a sheriff's department to it. Leon Lott folks or the sheriff up in Greenville have a very sophisticated sheriff's department. Charleston also. Use them. But SLED is invested in affirming the conviction. They don't want to find any fault. I mean, that's just human nature. So we think there's going to be plenty of things that weren't looked into, and we want to look into those. And the question is, and Jim and Phil and I have been talking about this, did she do it alone? Did she have somebody help her with this? And if you were sitting in the judge's chambers like we were when she brought in information on the jury you would call the egg lady, we call Myra Crosby, and listen to what she had to say. One time it was totally made up about some Facebook page. The second time, inexplicably a anonymous email came to the judge. We weren't told about it. It was investigated by the Attorney General's office and SLED without us being involved. No guardrails on that. But I mean, and call us naive because we were. We didn't press that. And I look back on it. We should have, with 20/20 hindsight, we maybe should have taken a little more aggressive. But we still couldn't have peeled that onion back then. But we will now.
A question about the retrial. Some have suggested that it may have been a mistake to put Alec on the stand. Any thought to whether you're going to put him on the stand in the retrial?
Two things. One, the client makes that decision. Two, that'll be a game day call. So you'll know when we know.
When will any retrial take place?
I would suspect within a year of now, but not by the end of the year. No, hell no.
And why is that? Why can't you go right to trial?
Well, I'll give you a couple of simple examples. One, we assume the same witnesses will testify in the retrial as the trial. We have a, 8,000-page transcript. We've got to break out each witness. We've got to read it, whoever's going to handle that person, outline it, and they can be used to impeach them. So, this is like a civil case where you've taken a deposition. Unlike any other criminal case you'll ever defend or prosecute. So that takes time. We've got to go back and see if they've given us all the discovery. There's some inference that we didn't get everything from the prosecution. We've got to go back and scrub that real hard. We've got to hire experts. They've got to look at all the information, new experts, and then give us an opinion.
Do you have enough money to hire new experts?
Jim, why don't you explain financially how this works? He's got a much better explanation for this than I do. Go ahead.
I mean, there is no new money, no found money, and I've said previously, we got paid to do a job. When you do criminal defense work, I mean, one way you do, you charge by the job. Sometimes you come out ahead, and sometimes you come out behind. But, right now, we're in the hole, but we got paid to do a job, and we're going to see it all the way through.
You're saying the job isn't finished yet.
Job is not finished yet, and we're not walking away from it. So we're going to see it through. I mean, that's where we are.
Is there any chance a retrial could happen in Richland County instead of Pelican?
You know, one of the things that we're looking at is a motion to transfer venue to a different county. It would have to be, if that takes place and is transferred, it'd have to be in a county that has a very similar demographics as Colleton County. So that would probably exclude Richland County, Charleston County, which I know all of y'all want to go to Charleston.
But Charleston is contiguous to Colleton, and one of the factors to be considered. I'm just saying.
It's Charleston. And so, but, you know, it's not our pick, but that'll be looked at very closely for sure.
Jim, can we talk about new evidence? I know last week you mentioned DNA evidence under Maggie's fingernails, essentially
Right.
connected to a male. Can we go into that a little bit more and how that will play a factor in this retrial?
Well, we pointed out during the last trial that they did find a unknown male DNA who's not related to any Murdaugh or any of Maggie's family under her fingernail. That was, you know, not really followed up on. We asked that they follow up on that before the last trial. We don't have possession of that DNA, so we can't do anything with it. We can perhaps, with a new case, back to square one, go and seek an order from the court to compel them to send it off to CODIS. CODIS is the national DNA database. So, I mean, if we were in charge and we had the facilities, the forensic lab, they had SLED, and we had search warrant abilities, we would have done things a lot differently and more timely. A lot of that opportunity is lost, and so that's unfortunate.
More optimism of getting that sent to CODIS, you believe, this go around?
Well, it'll be Chief Justice Kittredge issued an order last week saying he's going to appoint a new judge once the remitter goes down. And that'll be one of the things that we will present to a new judge asking for that relief. Whether he or she will do it remains to be seen.
Jim, you said the lawsuit is about holding Becky Hill accountable and also investigating. You say the state didn't do a good enough job of investigating her. What do you hope that investigation could yield?
The truth.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah, just, you know, we don't have a result in mind, but we have a lot of questions that we would like answered. You know, was she a lone wolf? Was she doing it just for the, you know, siren of celebrity, which she definitely was? And then I'll tell you, this removal of the egg lady juror is very suspicious, and that really wasn't a part of the case. We do make it a part of our complaint. We point out all of the inconsistencies of what she said, reporting to Judge Newman that the egg lady, Ms. Crosby's ex-husband, had posted something on Facebook, which we now know was a bald-faced lie, or someone lied to her. I mean, it makes no sense. And if you have questions, and I would encourage all of you to follow up with Joe McCullough, who represents Myra Crosby, who is investigating this as strenuously as we intend to do so, and he's been working on it for quite some time. I mean, the way she was targeted, it just is very curious, and we hope to get to the bottom of that.
Is there any possibility of taking a plea deal for a lesser charge?
Say again?
Is there any possibility of taking a plea deal for a
No,
lesser charge?
no plea deal. No, never will plead guilty. Off the table. We want a trial.
Yeah.
They can dismiss it.
Yeah, they can dismiss these charges. You know, but he'll never enter to a plea which required some admission that he did something he didn't do, and that's murdering his wife and son. I mean, that's not going to happen.
Who do you think did kill Maggie and Paul?
We wish we knew. We think we could have found out if we had the tools available. I mean, that opportunity was lost when they failed to follow the tire tracks in the grass leading away from the murders of Maggie and Paul. That opportunity was lost when they failed to maintain the integrity of the GPS data on Maggie's phone. Instead, it was at SLED downloading GPS coordinates at SLED that ultimately overwrote where her phone was and when it was on the night of the murders. And when they finally get into Maggie's phone and able to access the GPS data, you know where it said that phone had been last? Broad River Road, SLED Lab. I mean, that is outrageous that was allowed to happen. So, you know, John, we've gotten a lot of information. People are out there working on behalf of Alec for free, kind of like we are, and they've unearthed some really interesting stuff. And they've turned a significant amount over that to SLED. We'll be curious to see if SLED has done anything with it or will do anything with it.
If any of that investigation now goes back to the house and to the property, or is that a deal?
There's nothing that I'm aware of that's of evidentiary value on the property.
Let me just jump in and say that the actual scene has been, destroyed, right? It's been torn down, the property's been sold, the kennels, all of that are gone, so that's no longer in existence.
But our experts, in preparing for the first trial, did all kinds of forensic tests on the crime scene. A number of, and we put in evidence that if somebody could be in the house and shots fired down at the dog kennel, never hear them. I mean, we proved that without any contradiction whatsoever. So the story that he was up at the house and he had to have heard the shotgun and an AR, not. We had an expert run test. Can't do that anymore. So the uncontradicted evidence is going to be, if he was in the house, he wouldn't have heard the shots. So, I mean, it's those kinds of things. And we've got measurements, very, very, very specific measurements on where everything was, which, by the way, SLED did not do. The night of the murders, as they processed, it may not be SLED, maybe local law enforcement, they didn't dust for fingerprints in the feed, not dust, they don't do that anymore, but they did not process the feed room for fingerprints. They didn't look for DNA. Is that our hair? Let's pick it up and get it tested. There was a bloody footprint right next to Paul's body. It was a Carlton County Sheriff's deputy's foot. I mean, I'm not a big CSI fan, but this looks to me like they violated every basic rule, and we had a witness testify to that. So they got a lot of explaining to do.
What do you think the odds are of Alex getting an acquittal in the retrial?
You, John Monk, are playing those internet betting sites too much. I have no idea what his chances are.
I'm not playing them at all.
Well, you ought to try.
What do you think the odds are?
We have no idea. I mean, we don't predict football, basketball, or trials.
Just following up on what Dick said about the failures. During the trial, you'll remember SLED explained how they do murder investigations, and they do, they draw an imaginary circle, and then the imaginary circle that they drew here, Alec was in the middle of it. And he was in the middle of it from the night of the murders. And they knew that Alec left Moselle and went to his mother's house at Almeda, and then came back to Moselle and found his wife and son murdered brutally. And do you think for 1 minute that they should have gone to Moselle, Almeda, to see if there's anything of evidentiary value? Were there murder weapons at Almeda, which they want to intimate, during the trial? Oh, he parked over here, so he must have gotten rid of the guns over there. I mean, they had the opportunity to exclude Alec from that circle, but they didn't do it because they just failed so miserably in what their jobs were.
Let me say one other thing that brings to mind. As most of y'all know, I was a prosecutor for 12 years, and this is 40 years ago. If a body was found and they wanted to determine time of death, the coroner or a medical examiner would take an anal thermometer and get a core body temperature, then take a thermometer and get the ambient temperature. And in this case, alleged an hour and a half prior they'd been killed, sort of, the coroner showed up and he did something that just amazed me. he took his hand and he stuck it under Paul's armpit, and then that same hand took it under stuck it under Maggie's armpit, and he could calculate the time of death based on that. I mean, that's what we're dealing with here, folks. Stuck his hand under the armpit? Really? And yet, then they said, oh, well, we know when Maggie stopped using her phone and Paul stopped using his phone, that's the time of death. They ignore the fact that cell phone service down there was spotty at best. A number of people testified there was no cell phone service. So simply because they weren't using their phone doesn't mean they were dead. I mean, this thing has more holes in it than Swiss cheese.
In your opinion, what ultimately got Alex convicted?
I think 2.5 weeks of that of widows and orphans and mentally disabled kids testifying, not that he stole their money, but how just maliciously he stole the money, how he lied to them. I mean, when they finish with that, they're not going to believe forensic evidence. They're not going to believe him. They're not going to believe anything because he was so vilified.
And when he testified, the jury was programmed not to believe him by the clerk of court. And so, no matter what he said, I mean, he got on the stand to answer, questions about where he was and what he did that night. And we know now that, as the Supreme Court accurately described, she sought to undermine his credibility before he even testified. And understand, she's the second highest ranked court official in the trial. And she has closest contact with the jury, develops close relationships with them over 6 weeks. And, she is the one that they see more, she's the elected official. She summoned them all in. Her name's on the summons. Her name's on the check that they get to payment every week for serving on the jury. I mean, and this person is back there in the jury room telling them in so many words, don't believe Alec when he testifies. Don't believe the defense. Don't let them confuse you. All of that happened at the end of the trial right before we put up our case. So that is one reason he got convicted, I promise you.
You mentioned new evidence. If you already addressed this, I apologize, but you mentioned new evidence that you're going to bring out. You mentioned DNA found under Maggie's fingernails, more DNA. Is there other new evidence?
Well, let me say this. If there is, we tell you, I know you're not doing this intentionally, but you'll be telling them. So I don't think we tell you. How about that?
Fair enough.
Maybe not unintentionally, but never mind. Anything else?
Do you think that Becky done this with other trials before down in Colleton County?
Well, you don't know, do you? That's why this lawsuit is so important, because it's going to allow us to peel the onion on her and what she's done on this case. Were there other people involved? Was she a lone wolf? Has she done it on other cases? But certainly, it was a despicable act, and the Supreme Court found it to be such. Anything else? Thank you very much for coming today.
Wrapping up that press conference there with Murdaugh's attorneys, really getting more details about not only the lawsuit that was just filed a couple of minutes ago that we were able to receive over into our newsroom, but the very latest about when we could possibly be seeing a new trial and the very latest on possible new evidence that could be released in this next court case. Now, Dick Harpootlian did want to start off by saying that the Attorney General cannot be seeking the death penalty. Seeking the death penalty, what new evidence? He said, quote, "We've seen this from the beginning where Alan Wilson plays politics than prosecutors." Now, in a statement released on Friday night by the Attorney General Alan Wilson regarding Alec Murdaugh, he said, quote, "In light of the Supreme Court's decision, we are back to square one on this case. And that means all of our legal options are on the table, including the death penalty." That quote, that's what Dick Harpootlian was mentioning before we even got into the new details about the lawsuit. Dick Harpootlian saying whoever attempted to tamper with the jury is guilty of crime. He said also, quote, "Please, Alan, focus on your job and not the politics." So that was his response saying about the death penalty on in there. They also mentioned that they received a number of new information post-trial, and it was sent to not only their attorneys, but also to SLED. They're saying that once a judge is appointed by, of course, Justice Kistridge, then it would then move on. The Supreme Court did have the case, then it'll then go to a trial court. So in the next couple weeks, then a subpoena and then an power to investigate. Now, they did ask when we could possibly be seeing all of this back in court. They said it's going to be a while, for at least up until the year. They are all also about what we want individually questioning the jury. Can we get it in Colleton County? Can we get it into a different county? Could that be happening? How are you going to be finding impartial jurors? And that is something that the attorneys are going to be looking into. Now, the state should have the same interest, what Dick Harpootlian mentioned, that the state should have the same interest in a 12 to 14 impartial, fair jurors as much as they do. And so that is something that they're going to be looking at too as well. Went on over to Jim as well. He said that he was able to talk to Alec Murdaugh. Said when they reported back to him back when the Supreme Court happened, Jim says that Alex said that it went well and what they have hoped for. But then when he got the order, he already read the opinion. According to Jim, Alec Murdaugh said, I read it, I saw it, but he was reserved. He said he was having a hard time believing that all of that was going to be going back into trial. According to Jim, Alec Murdaugh said that he was very grateful. He did thank his attorneys, and he even got emotional. Says he deserves to be in jail for his financial crimes. That's what Jim mentioned. But being in jail for something that you didn't do is a hard thing to swallow. That was what Jim said there earlier on in this press conference. Another couple of questions that we were able to hear is also about Buster. And Jim also mentioned that Buster is entitled to his privacy, as they're not going to be answering any questions about him, except that Buster supports his dad. He then went on, Dick Harpootlian, saying that they're going on getting the Freedom of Information request on SLED to get more information because he said, quote, it makes sense to have the agency to have an inherent option to get that. They said they wanted sustained investigating whether it was valid or not, all of that evidence. He also then said that SLED was investigating a affirmed conviction, and that's what they're going to be looking into as well. Other questions, of course, going back into the lawsuit that came out against the clerk of court, Becky Hill. One of the questions that they're looking at is if Becky Hill did it alone, saying that if you were sitting in the judge's chambers when she brought information on the egg lady, one was a fake Facebook page, according to Dick Harpootlian, the other was an anonymous to a judge, all of that information on if she did it alone, that is something that they're going to be looking into as well. People also asked about the finances. They said that they are going to be looking at hiring new experts and getting opinion experts. And then one of the reporters out there said, do they have the money for it? Their response is that there is no new money. They got paid to do a job and are charged by the job. Jim went on to say, we are in the hole, paid to do a job, and the job is not finished yet, so they are looking to see it through. Again, as we mentioned, a possible motion to then transfer it. It has to be within a county that is similar demographics of Colleton County. That is something that they're still working on if it is possible to get this court case out of Colleton County. And then going back to the lawsuit, according to Jim Griffin, again, this was under the federal law civil statute, Alex's right to a fair trial, that he's been tried to an untampered jury with this ruling as a matter of estate. He also says that damages, including $600,000 that were spent on the first case, as well as that Alex is owed a lot of money. He also said nothing recovered will not go to him. So whatever happens in this lawsuit, Jim didn't want to say that none of that money will then go back to Alec Murdaugh. However, it is going to be holding what they say Becky accountable for what she did. Also going into Phil Barber, he mentioned that the jury process was violated, who was sworn to uphold it. That's what they're going to do. Again, the $600,000 in damages and the money allocated through the receivership to find out exactly what happened. They also went on to talk about some new evidence that they're looking at. One of them is being DNA evidence that were possibly under Maggie's fingernails, evidence not directly connected to any family member. So who was that DNA? That is one thing that they are still looking into. They could seek an order of the court to send it on off to a database. They said they were in charge of facilities to have SLED and search those warrantabilities. But they also went on to say that they do not have all of the resources that SLED did in order of all of this. They said they have more evidence. If they did have more evidence, they are not going to be telling us, the public, as they said that they would again get to the other side. Now, we are continuing to follow the very latest on this, but I also wanted to bring us attention into the biggest takeaways from the prosecutor's plan to try Murdaugh, which happened last week. Now, the clearest message from their press conference was that the Attorney General's office intends to move forward, quote, aggressively with that retrial. Wilson repeatedly emphasizing that the state still believes that Murdaugh is guilty. Prosecutors will stand behind the original case, and the office does want a speedy trial. Wilson said, quote, "It is currently my intention to seek a speedy retrial in the case against Alec Murdaugh." Wilson also making it clear that the Attorney General's office still believes that the original trial outcome was correct. He said prosecutors always believed Becky Hill's conduct was, quote, "inappropriate, improper, but ultimately harmless errors," saying that while we strongly disagree with the Supreme Court, we do respect that decision. A major theme, of course, as we're now hearing with Becky Hill, Wilson and Waters working carefully to separate the prosecution team from the misconduct that led to that reversal, stressing the misconduct was unknown to the state, that prosecutors were not involved, and the Supreme Court itself praised the prosecutors' handling of that case. And then also pushing back on the criticism that were tied to the governor's race. He also said was asked directly about political criticism from opponents in the South Carolina governor's race. He's sharply rejecting his claim in his office, saying that people were murdered. He accused critics of playing politics with a serious criminal matter. Again, all of this going into what could possibly be changing on in this new trial. And of course, when are we going to be expecting to be seeing this? Now, neither Wilson nor Waters gave specifics about retrial strategy, but both are acknowledging that the Supreme Court did give prosecutors guidance on how to handle the evidence in the future, financial crimes evidence, how extensively prosecutors can present it, and then how it should be all tied to that motive. Waters defending the original strategy, saying that prosecutors believe the evidence was necessary to explain the motive. And then also Wilson repeatedly emphasizing that Murdaugh, is not walking free despite getting a new trial. He highlighted his 27-year state sentence and the concurrent 40-year federal sentence that is tied to his financial crimes. But yes, going back into here, saying that our team did have evidence on the crime scene over in Dick Harpootlian and Murdaugh's defense team, saying that the second highest ranked court official at the time, Becky Hill, made relationships with the jury. She was the one to see them more. As an elected official, her name is on the checks and the summons. This person back there in the jury room, quote, "don't believe them," end of the trial, right when they were putting up the case. So that is all coming into that lawsuit that we just received a couple of minutes ago. What we're going to be doing is putting all of this together for later on today at Friends at 5, and you can read more about both press conferences as well as that most recent lawsuit right now on our website, WLTX.com. We thank you all so much for joining us here for this breaking news update, and as always, depend on us to keep you informed.